The morning sun glinted off a row of new company cars lined up like trophies. My coworkers gathered, buzzing with excitement, snapping photos as the regional manager read out names. I stood there, sure mine would be called. I'd been the top performer for over a year. For months, the company had been hyping this moment. Each branch would receive a fleet of brand new cars, and the most productive employees would be rewarded with one. I had every reason to believe I'd be at the top of that list. My performance was the best in the branch. I'd closed the most accounts, trained half the team, and fixed problems other people left behind. Standing in that parking lot, I could almost feel the keys in my palm. I'd even picked out which car I wanted, the silver sedan gleaming in the front row. My heart hammered with anticipation as I watched the ceremony unfold. Instead, I watched my boss hand Amy the keys to a gleaming SUV, her laughter ringing across the lot. Amy, bubbly, pretty Amy, who left early whenever she pleased and charmed her way out of every responsibility. When my turn came, he handed me a thin envelope. Inside, a bus pass. My stomach dropped to my shoes and the world seemed to tilt sideways. My chest burned as I stared at the bus pass, waiting for the punchline. This had to be some kind of joke. The plastic card felt cheap and humiliating in my hands, like a slap across the face disguised as a gift. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, looking my boss directly in the eye, hoping to see some hint of humor or mistake. His smirk deepened as he muttered, "Try being more of a team player," before turning to chat with Amy. The people around me tried to avoid my eyes, shuffling awkwardly as they pretended not to notice my humiliation. Their discomfort was almost as painful as my own. My hands trembled, not from embarrassment alone, but from the sudden, crushing realization. This was intentional. He'd planned this moment, orchestrated it for maximum impact. While everyone else got keys to brand new cars, I got public humiliation wrapped in a thin white envelope. The regional manager cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Amy giggled beside my boss, her new keys jingling like bells in her manicured fingers. She didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed for me. Try being more of a team player. The words echoed in my head like a broken record, each repetition more infuriating than the last. The crowd began to drift away, chattering excitedly about Amy's car and the other lucky winners. I trailed behind, each step feeling heavier than the last. The bus pass felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket, a constant reminder of my supposed inadequacy. My boss passed me in the hallway, barely glancing my way, his arm casually slung around Amy's shoulder, like they were old friends celebrating together. She flashed me a victorious little smirk over his shoulder, as if this was her personal win against me. The smugness in her expression made my blood boil. I went back to my desk in a daze, the congratulations of my coworkers feeling hollow and awkward. Everyone knew what had just happened. Everyone had seen me get handed that envelope while others got cars. Some looked sympathetic, others just seemed relieved it wasn't them. The bus pass sat beside my keyboard like an insult made physical. $20 of public transportation credit. That's what my 2 years of dedication, my late nights, my perfect sales record was worth to him. I stared at my computer screen, but the numbers blurred together. All I could think about was that smirk on his face and those 4 words that seemed designed to break me down. All afternoon, my mind replayed every past confrontation, every moment I'd stood up for myself, instead of silently accepting his demands. The time I refused to work unpaid overtime because I had plans with my sister for her birthday dinner. The day he tried to present my pitch deck as his own, and I spoke up in the meeting to correct him in front of the entire team. The safety hazard I'd reported exposed wiring in the break room that sparked whenever someone used the microwave. He'd brushed it off with a wave of his hand until corporate got involved and forced him to fix it, making him look incompetent. Every single one had been a small rebellion against his authority. Every time I'd refused to be a doormat or let him take credit for my work. Now I understood the price he wanted me to pay for my independence. This wasn't about team spirit or performance metrics. This was revenge, pure and simple. He wanted me to know that standing up for myself had consequences, that speaking out would cost me dearly in his little kingdom. Meanwhile, Amy's endless early departures and sloppy work were overlooked because she never challenged him, never questioned his decisions, never made him look foolish in meetings. She was the perfect employee in his eyes, compliant, decorative, and completely non-threatening. Amy was everything my boss wanted in an employee: bubbly, agreeable, and never challenging his authority or decisions. I'd watched her operation for months, studying how she managed to fail upward with such effortless grace and charm. I'd seen her leave early countless times, sometimes in the middle of big projects when deadlines loomed. "Family emergency," she'd say with a pouty smile, grabbing her designer purse while the rest of us stayed late to cover her abandoned work and meet her commitments. I'd personally cleaned up her mistakes more than once, staying until midnight to fix client presentations she'd botched or important calls she'd forgotten to make. While she was at happy hour posting Instagram stories about her fabulous life, I was in the office saving her accounts from disaster. Her sales numbers were mediocre at best, but she had something I apparently lacked: the ability to make our boss feel important and valued. She laughed at his terrible jokes, asked his advice on everything from client strategies to lunch choices, and never, ever disagreed with him publicly. And yet she'd been rewarded like a star performer, given the biggest, nicest car in the lot while I got a bus pass. It was favoritism so obvious it was almost insulting to everyone's intelligence. The worst part? She probably genuinely believed she deserved it in his mind. The bus was late, just like everything else that day seemed designed to humiliate me further. I stood at the stop, still wearing my work clothes, watching cars drive past in an endless stream. Some of them contained my coworkers, probably heading home to show off their shiny new company vehicles to jealous neighbors. When the bus finally arrived, I climbed aboard and found a seat near the back. The vinyl was cracked and sticky, and the air smelled like disinfectant mixed with defeat. Through the grimy window, the city blurred past in a stream of gray buildings and brown exhaust. I thought about how everyone in that parking lot had seen what he did to me, how he'd made sure it was public, maximum humiliation for everyone to witness and remember. He wanted me small. He wanted me compliant and broken. But as I sat there on that hard bus seat, listening to the engine wheeze and feeling every pothole, I felt something shift inside me. Instead of breaking me down like he'd intended, his petty revenge was building something harder and more dangerous than he could imagine. The humiliation was heavy, pressing down on my shoulders, but underneath it I felt a dangerous kind of clarity forming. He had absolutely no idea who he was really dealing with. What no one knew, not Amy, not my boss, not anyone in that parking lot, was that my last name wasn't really Pierce. It was Lauren Pierce Ashford, and that second name carried more weight than anyone could imagine. My father is Richard Ashford, CEO of Ashford and Hall, the very company we all worked for, the same corporation that paid our salaries and provided those coveted company cars. From the time I was 16, he drilled into me the value of hard work and fairness. He'd told me I'd have to prove myself without using the family name, earning respect through action rather than connections or inherited privilege. That's why I worked under my mother's maiden name, Pierce, instead of Ashford. That's why my boss had no idea he'd just humiliated the CEO's daughter in front of half the branch. He thought he was punishing some nobody who had no recourse, no power, no way to fight back. My father believed in teaching lessons the hard way, in understanding what it meant to work from the bottom up. He'd sent his own daughter to work in the trenches, to experience what it was like to earn every promotion, every recognition, every single dollar. But he'd also taught me never to tolerate injustice or let bullies win, no matter how small their kingdom might be. This branch wasn't just a job for me, it was a carefully planned test. My father had sent me here to quietly observe how the operation really worked, away from the polished presentations and carefully orchestrated corporate visits that painted everything in glowing terms. He wanted unfiltered truth about his managers, his policies, and his company culture. He wanted to know what happened when nobody from headquarters was watching, when people thought their actions had no consequences. Over the past year, I'd collected detailed mental notes of every strength and flaw in the operation, the way certain employees were favored regardless of their actual performance, the safety issues that got buried in paperwork and ignored, the way legitimate complaints disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. I'd watched my boss play favorites, take credit for other people's innovations and hard work, and create a toxic environment where speaking up got you punished rather than rewarded. I documented it all in my mind, waiting for the right moment to compile my comprehensive report. Today's bus pass incident wasn't just the final straw. It was the perfect crystallization of everything wrong with his leadership style and the culture he'd created. And now, my father was about to hear every single detail of what I'd witnessed. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone for what felt like hours before finally dialing. The bus pass lay on the table like evidence of a crime, a physical reminder of the injustice I'd endured. My father answered on the second ring, his voice calm and warm like always. "Lauren, how was your day?" The familiar comfort of his tone almost made me break down completely. I told him everything, starting from the beginning. The parking lot ceremony, Amy getting the SUV despite her poor performance, the bus pass handed to me like charity, the smirk, the team player, comment delivered like a threat. I told him about the ongoing pattern of favoritism, the safety issues he'd consistently ignored, the way he systematically retaliated against anyone who dared to challenge his authority or speak up about problems. My father listened without interrupting, the way he always did when gathering crucial information for important decisions. When I finished, there was a long moment of silence that stretched between us. "I see," he said finally, his voice taking on that steel edge I remembered from my childhood when someone had crossed a line. "And how long has this pattern been going on?" "Months, maybe longer than that." Another pause, heavy with implication. Then, "I'll see you in the morning. Don't be late." The line went dead. We spent an hour on the phone that night, planning every single detail with military precision. My father believed in making statements that couldn't be misunderstood or ignored, and this one needed to be completely unmistakable. "We'll arrive together," he said, his voice carrying that executive authority I'd grown up hearing. "I want them to see exactly who you are and what this company truly stands for when it comes to fairness and justice." I suggested the limo. Sleek, black, impossible to miss or ignore, a symbol of power that would immediately shift everyone's assumptions. My father loved the idea instantly. "Respect is built on truth," he said, "and sometimes truth needs a proper stage to be fully appreciated." He insisted on walking in behind me, letting the moment breathe and develop before he appeared. The drama wasn't for show. It was carefully calculated strategy. He wanted my boss to have time to process what was happening, to fully understand the magnitude of his mistake before the hammer fell. "This isn't about revenge," my father reminded me, though I could hear the edge in his voice. "This is about accountability and setting the standard for how people should be treated." But as I hung up and tried to sleep, I couldn't deny the small thrill of anticipation running through my veins. The next morning, the limo's polished doors reflected the curious faces of my coworkers as I stepped out with deliberate slowness. Their eyes widened as they took in the sleek black vehicle, their whispers sharp and confused as they tried to process this unexpected development. How could she afford that after getting a bus pass? Is she quitting in style? Did she win the lottery overnight? Maybe she's having some kind of breakdown? I walked slowly toward the entrance, my heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown to something momentous. Each step was measured and deliberate, designed to build tension and curiosity. I could feel dozens of eyes tracking my movement from the parking lot to the building. My boss stood near the front door, probably arriving early to gloat about yesterday's masterful humiliation. His face shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion to genuine concern as he watched me approach with this new air of confidence. Something about my expression must have warned him that this wasn't the broken, compliant employee he created yesterday. The woman walking toward him had steel in her spine that hadn't been there before. The whispers grew louder behind me. People were pulling out phones, probably texting others about the mysterious luxury vehicle and its unexpected passenger. Before I could step inside, my boss hurried over, forcing a strained smile that didn't reach his eyes and couldn't hide the panic already starting to show around the edges of his carefully maintained facade. "Lauren, can we talk?" "Maybe I misjudged the situation yesterday," he said. lowering his voice and trying to steer me toward a private corner of the lobby where fewer people could witness whatever conversation was about to unfold. His sudden change in tone would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetically transparent. Yesterday, I was unworthy of basic respect, dismissed with a bus pass and a sneer. Today, after seeing me step out of a limo, I was suddenly worth his personal attention and concern. "It's too late for that," I said simply, standing my ground and refusing to be maneuvered into privacy where he could control the narrative. His confusion deepened, and I could see him frantically trying to work out the mathematical impossibility. How did the woman he'd humiliated with a bus pass afford a luxury vehicle overnight? What had changed between yesterday and today? Behind me, I heard the limo door close with an expensive-sounding thud that seemed to echo through the parking lot. My boss's eyes flicked over my shoulder, and I watched his face transform from confusion to something approaching genuine terror. My father's footsteps were measured and confident as he approached, and the lobby fell completely silent. The lobby fell silent as my father walked in, his tailored suit and natural authority filling the room like a physical presence you could almost touch. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People turned to stare, sensing that something important was happening. My boss froze completely, his eyes darting between us as he tried to process what he was seeing. I could practically see the gears turning frantically in his head, trying to connect the dots between the woman he'd dismissed and this obviously powerful man. My father approached us with the calm confidence of someone who owned everything around him, which, technically, he did. Every desk, every computer, every company car in the parking lot belonged to him. He extended his hand to me like we were meeting for the first time in a formal business setting. "Miss Pierce," he said with perfect formality, shaking my hand with a slight smile that didn't reveal our relationship. Then he turned to face the growing crowd of employees who had gathered to watch this strange and unexpected scene unfold. His voice carried easily across the marble lobby, reaching every corner and ensuring everyone could hear clearly. "This is my daughter," he announced with quiet authority, letting the words hang in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The color drained from my boss's face so fast I thought he might actually faint right there on the spot. "I do not tolerate injustice, favoritism, or unfair treatment in my company," my father continued, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel that made everyone in the room understand this wasn't a casual visit. He looked directly at my boss, holding his gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment that seemed to stretch on forever. My boss seemed to physically shrink under that stare, his earlier confidence and smugness evaporating like morning mist in sunlight. Around us, my coworkers shifted awkwardly, suddenly understanding that they were witnessing something historic. Amy had appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face pale as death as she clutched her new car keys, the same keys that had been her prize for being the favorite. The air felt electric with tension, charged with the weight of what was obviously coming next. Everyone could sense it in their bones. This wasn't just a surprise visit from corporate headquarters. This was Judgment Day arriving in an expensive suit. My father's words echoed through the lobby with crystal clarity. Injustice, favoritism, unfair treatment. Everyone who'd witnessed yesterday's parking lot humiliation understood exactly what he was referring to, and many probably remembered their own moments of unfair treatment. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning and someone's nervous, barely audible cough. My boss opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again helplessly. Without raising his voice or changing his perfectly calm tone, my father delivered the verdict with surgical precision. "You're relieved of your duties, effective immediately." My boss tried desperately to stammer out an excuse, words tumbling over each other as he attempted to explain or justify what had happened yesterday. His voice grew higher and more frantic with each word, but my father didn't even glance at him, dismissing his protests with the same casual indifference my boss had shown me. Two senior managers from corporate, who had apparently been waiting just outside like backup cavalry, stepped through the lobby doors as if perfectly choreographed. They approached my former boss with the kind of professional efficiency that spoke of extensive experience with these delicate situations. "Sir, if you'll come with us," one of them said politely but with unmistakable firmness, already moving to flank him. The sound of his increasingly desperate protests and frantic explanations faded as they professionally escorted him toward the exit. His voice grew higher and more panicked with each step, but nobody was listening to his excuses anymore. The decision had been made. The lobby remained frozen in stunned silence, dozens of people processing what they'd just witnessed. Amy dropped her car keys, the metal clanging against the marble floor like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. Justice, it turned out, was much quieter than I'd expected it to be. The room erupted into hushed murmurs as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Conversations sparked up in corners, people processing the bombshell that had just exploded their normal Tuesday morning. Amy's eyes darted to mine, searching for some kind of lifeline or reassurance. I gave her none. She had been part of the game, celebrating her unearned victory while I was publicly humiliated. Now the board had flipped completely. People began to realize that the balance of power had shifted in ways they couldn't have imagined. The quiet woman they'd watched get handed a bus pass yesterday was actually the CEO's daughter. The person they'd probably gossiped about was standing right there, hearing every whisper. Some faces showed embarrassment, others confusion. A few looked impressed or excited. But everyone understood that everything they thought they knew about the office hierarchy had just been turned upside down. My father stood calmly in the center of it all, observing the reactions with the same analytical eye he brought to board meetings. The show wasn't over yet. My father turned to address the room, his voice cutting through the whispers and bringing everyone's attention back to him. An interim manager will be assigned to this branch, he announced. Until then, Lauren will assist with the transition. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had been handed a bus pass 24 hours ago was now being placed in temporary authority. The same person they'd watched get publicly humiliated was suddenly sitting at the head of the table. I saw people exchanging glances, recalculating their positions, and probably remembering every interaction they'd had with me. How many had joined in the whispered gossip? How many had watched yesterday's scene without saying anything? The room was tense, but for the first time in months, that tension wasn't aimed at me. I wasn't the target anymore. I was the one holding the power. My father caught my eye and nodded slightly. This was my moment to step up, to show whether I'd learned the lessons he'd been trying to teach me. I straightened my shoulders and prepared to find out what kind of leader I really was. Later that day, Amy approached me with a nervous laugh, her earlier confidence completely gone. She'd been avoiding me all morning, but eventually worked up the courage for damage control. "Lauren, hi! Yesterday was just such a crazy mix-up, wasn't it?" she said, her voice shaky and too bright. "I mean, I had no idea about your family." I listened without saying a word, watching her struggle to find the right approach. She'd gone from victorious to terrified in the span of a few hours. "I hope there aren't any hard feelings," she continued, her smile becoming more forced with each word. "We've always been such a great team, right?" When I didn't respond, she finally trailed off, realizing I wasn't going to offer her the comfort or reassurance she was desperately seeking. "Good luck, Amy," was all I said before walking away. Her face crumpled slightly as the finality of those words hit her. There would be no easy forgiveness, no pretending yesterday hadn't happened. Actions, as my father always said, have consequences. Over the next week, I watched the branch transform. People were suddenly punctual, careful, and respectful in ways they'd never been before. The petty cliques that had ruled the office dissolved almost overnight. Amy arrived on time every day and actually stayed until closing. Others who had been coasting on charm rather than competence found themselves working harder than they had in months. The change wasn't just about fear, though there was certainly some of that. It was about the realization that their actions had been noticed, recorded, and evaluated by someone with the power to do something about it. My father's visit had left a mark far deeper than I'd expected. People had seen what fairness looked like when it was actually enforced from the top. They'd witnessed accountability in action. The toxic atmosphere that had made my life miserable for months was evaporating. replaced by something that actually felt like a professional workplace. For the first time since I'd started working there, I looked forward to coming to the office. I never gloated about what had happened. I never bragged or threw my newfound authority around. I just did my work, treating everyone fairly and focusing on making the branch run better. But my presence alone was a constant reminder of what had transpired. Every time someone looked at me, they remembered the limo, the reveal, the firing. They remembered that actions have consequences. My father checked in occasionally, his questions brief but pointed. He wanted to know how I was handling the transition, whether I was learning from the experience, if I was ready for bigger challenges. I had passed his test, not just by enduring the unfair treatment, but by handling the aftermath with grace and professionalism. More importantly, I had passed my own test. I'd learned what kind of leader I wanted to be. The woman who had been handed a bus pass was gone. In her place stood someone who understood both sides of power, what it felt like to be powerless and what it meant to use power responsibly. Word spread quickly across other branches about the bus pass story. The tale took on a life of its own, growing in the telling, becoming a legend whispered in break rooms and shared over lunch. Managers in other locations started rethinking how they treated their teams. The company cars that had been symbols of favoritism became reminders that merit should matter more than politics. I heard from friends in other departments that some managers had called emergency meetings to review their policies. Others had started paying closer attention to their own behavior, wondering if they had their own Lauren watching and taking notes. The ripple effect was exactly what my father had hoped for. One dramatic moment had sent a message throughout the entire company. Fairness wasn't optional, and accountability would be enforced. It was the kind of cultural shift that couldn't be mandated from above. It had to be demonstrated, lived, and remembered. The office atmosphere continued to evolve. Even without my father's physical presence, fairness became the unspoken rule that governed every interaction. People who had once looked down on me or dismissed my contributions now sought my input on projects. They asked my opinion in meetings and actually listened to my answers. The shift wasn't just about my new position, it was about respect. Real respect, earned through competence and fairness rather than fear or favoritism. I found myself becoming the kind of leader I'd always wanted to work for. Someone who valued results over politics, who treated everyone with dignity regardless of their position in the hierarchy. The bus pass incident had taught me something valuable. Power without character is just bullying. But character without power is often helpless. The key was finding the balance between the two. My father had been right. Sometimes you have to experience powerlessness to understand how to use power responsibly. One afternoon, my father called me into his office at headquarters. The corner office with its wall of windows overlooking the city, the place where real decisions were made. "I have an offer for you," he said without preamble. "A permanent leadership position. Not because you're my daughter, but because you've proven you can handle the responsibility." The position was significant. Regional manager, overseeing multiple branches, with the authority to implement real change across the company. "You've shown you understand what leadership really means," he continued. "That it's not about having power over people, but about using power to help people succeed." It was the highest compliment he could give, and we both knew it. For 2 years, I'd worked to prove myself worthy of his respect and trust. Today, I'd finally achieved it. I accepted the position, feeling a quiet pride that had nothing to do with family connections and everything to do with hard work and character. On my final day at the branch, I stood in the parking lot where it all began. The sun caught the gleam of the remaining company cars, and I could almost see the ghost of that humiliating morning. I remembered the weight of that bus pass in my hands, the crushing realization that merit didn't matter as much as politics. I remembered feeling small and powerless, watching Amy drive away in her unearned SUV. But I also remembered the strength I'd found in that moment of humiliation. The clarity that came from seeing true injustice up close, the determination to never let bullies win. The parking lot looked the same, but everything else had changed. The culture, the leadership, the understanding that fairness wasn't negotiable. I smiled, knowing the story had come full circle. The woman who'd been handed a bus pass had become the person handing out the keys. My father had always said, "Power shows who you are when you think no one is watching." My former boss had shown his true character, and it had destroyed him. I had shown mine, and it had built something lasting. The limo hadn't been about revenge. It had been about truth, about pulling back the curtain on injustice and letting the light shine in. As I drove away from that branch for the last time, I thought about all the people who would benefit from the changes we'd made. The future employees who would be judged on merit rather than politics. The talented people who wouldn't be pushed aside for speaking up. The bus pass was still in my desk drawer at home, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a symbol of transformation. It represented the moment when everything changed, when I stopped accepting unfairness and started demanding better. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the deepest defeats. Sometimes you have to be broken down before you can be built back up stronger. And sometimes justice arrives in a black stretch limo.